This week's bloodshed in Egypt has reinforced what's been a profound change in perceptions among many in the Muslim world over the last year. If the great struggle convulsing the Middle East used to be defined primarily as a battle for freedom against tyranny, it's now beginning to look much more like a fight over the role of religion, for secular politics against Islamism. That doesn't mean religion versus secularism. Many of those who filled Tahrir Square 7 weeks ago demanding the overthrow of the Brotherhood were themselves devout Muslims. They just don't believe that the state should be governed by Islam alone. That was the vision of Hassan al-Banna, the Egyptian schoolteacher who founded the Brotherhood in 1928. Its main slogan begins, "God is our aim, the Quran our law." Since the revolution of 2011, the Brotherhood's repeatedly reaffirmed its commitment to democracy, but many distrusted it. In its year in power, the Brotherhood confirmed the fears of many liberals. It pushed through a new constitution which expanded the role of Islamic law, and it seemed to govern in its own narrow interests. But many of its opponents exaggerated the degree to which it had actually changed society. I heard, for example, the false claim that it had closed down many nightclubs and cinemas, and supporters of Egypt's new rulers began standardly to refer to the Brotherhood as terrorists. The truth, though, is that President Morsi was removed as much through fear of what he might do in the future as through anger over what he'd actually done. In Tunisia, where the Arab Spring began, there's the same distrust. The Islamist party, freely elected there, has moved cautiously. It's in coalition with secular parties. But the assassination this year of 2 leading left-wing politicians, apparently by Islamic extremists, led to mass protests against the government. And in Turkey, the riots earlier this summer in Istanbul showed anger is mounting even against the most moderate version of Islamism, Turkey's governing AK party. There are claims it's become too authoritarian and wants to impose its values on secularists. But back in Egypt, the overthrow of the Brotherhood has been achieved by an unnatural alliance. The security forces are now backed by many of the liberal revolutionaries who used to condemn them for numerous rights abuses.
What we're seeing is a coalition of liberal, secular, youth, revolutionary groups decide that what they value is secularism at all cost, even if the cost is a shredding of every other liberal value that they hold. There's a serious problem at the heart of Arab liberal thought. They haven't been able to politically organise and win elections, and so they're grasping for solutions, and unfortunately the army is the only deeply flawed instrument they've been able to use and find.
And now, views of the bloodiest uprising in Syria are changing as jihadis have joined the rebels there and the fight's become more sectarian. What's really surprised me in the last few months is to find that many of the activists who began the uprisings in Tunisia and Egypt 2 years ago have little sympathy for those who say they're fighting for freedom in Syria. On the contrary, many of them believe that the dictatorship of President Assad is actually the lesser of the 2 evils facing that country.
You're seeing a real ambivalence about Syria and a certain amount of sympathy for the plight that Assad faces. The rhetoric that Assad uses, it's either me or the Islamists, and the Islamists are only one step away from the jihadists and Al-Qaeda. That is a narrative we are now seeing occurring in other places, including Egypt.
That doesn't mean that revolutionaries in Egypt now feel nostalgia for the Mubarak era. But at the end of another terrifying day in Cairo, the hopes of the early days of the revolution seem ever further away. The will of the people, a constantly changing commodity, can't be assured simply by the overthrow of tyranny.